What's going on, guys? Welcome back. So, Canderous Ordo has been out for a couple of days now, and the question people are really asking about is he that good at a 3 or 4 stars? And the simple answer is no, not really. So that's going to be it for this video, guys. I like to no, but seriously, he is not that good at a low star count. We're going to talk about all that in this video, what his strengths are, what he has going for him, and why you will need to focus on him in the future. But something to consider is that he is probably not going to be worth gearing up to max gear 11 or even pushing for gear 12 down the road. So we need to start with his kit first and talk about that, because that's where most of his problems lie, with some abilities there in his kit, and that is what causes him to not be such a good character. So let's start there. So we do have Canderous here, and you can see that I did go ahead and max him out on gear 11 for testing purposes, just to see what I could get out of him. He is at 4 stars, so I did buy the $10 pack for him with his shards, and you can see I have most of his abilities upgraded. And I gotta say right away, this animation where he tinkers with the gun, that's really cool. I really enjoy that. That's a very nice touch. But get into his kit. You do have his basic Interminable Assault, deals physical damage and attacks again. If this enemy had protection before this attack, he attacks for a 3rd time, and he inflicts tenacity down for 2 turns. Pretty cool there. You don't see a lot of tenacity down on basics, so seeing that with a character here is great, plus a triple tap option, also really cool. Overwhelming Firepower, it's his special ability, deals physical damage to all enemies, inflicts offense down for 2 turns. This attack ignores defense. 3-turn cooldown, 2 turns of offense down, pretty solid here. Offense down is a very strong debuff for the most part. And then his unique Mandalorian Veteran. At the start of battle, Canderous gains 10% health steal and potency for each Old Republic and Scoundrel ally. Whenever he deals damage to an enemy, he inflicts a damage over time effect for 2 turns. So basically, he can triple tap with his basic that applies dots. He can apply dots to everybody with his AoE attack with the Overwhelming Firepower. So you put out dots and you put out offense down. For his other unique I Like a Challenge, there is a Zeta upgrade to it, which we'll get to that in a moment. Deals 50% more damage, Interminable Assault, and Overwhelming Firepower to enemies who are taunting, death marked, or marked. Whenever an enemy with a damage over time effect is damaged by an attack, he gains 8% turn meter. When an enemy gains taunt or becomes death marked or marked, Canderous gains crit chance up for 2 turns. So pretty cool there. He gains a lot of turn meter when enemies with damage over time effects take damage. He gets increased damage against marked and taunting enemies, and he also gains a buff for crit chance up. But the problem here, where cracks start to show, is his Zeta, where all it does is just give him crit damage up for 2 turns along with crit chance up. This really feels like something that's kind of tacked on. It doesn't feel like something that should deserve its own Zeta here. I mean, if there was something more here, like he gains additional defense penetration, or he gains some kind of buff or boost to his, like, really boost his damage beyond just crit damage up, I would say this is probably a Zeta that you may want to look at down the road somewhere. But right now, with just crit damage up, it feels like a tacked on afterthought of a Zeta. It's not really something that pops out that you want to say, wow, this looks like a cool Zeta. So I would not really recommend putting the Zeta on him, which is gonna suck down the road as well, because that means that you're gonna need a heavy investment for this character to end up being that useful. So not really something you want to look at. Now, for his mods, I do have crit chance and crit damage on him, and I have some decent mods on him. I mean, 73 speed, 66% crit damage. Now, potency, this is where things get interesting. Now, on that unique, he gains 10% bonus health steal and potency for Old Republic and Scoundrel allies. He has 0% base potency at max gear 11. 0. So this is another big problem for me, is that this severely limits the options of what you can run him in. This means that he pretty much needs to be running with a full Scoundrel or Old Republic team to really be able to get out those damage over time effects. He can apply tenacity down with his basic, but you can't always apply tenacity. You can't always guarantee that triple tap because they have to have protection. And even then, that means the first 2 attacks aren't going to apply dots. So there are some problems here. Not having any potency at all on Canderous, probably not something that they should have done. That's the first main complaint I really have. Well, that's not the first complaint, but it is a big complaint for me, is that he has to basically rely on Old Republic and Scoundrel allies to actually be able to put out those debuffs. And that for me is something that really should not have happened. So having no potency is a problem. He's got some decent damage. His crit chance is a bit low, but he is only at 4 stars. That will go up. Plus, there is some more gear that you will have to boost that. And really, when you get down to his armor penetration, 156, that's not too bad at this point. You do have a couple pieces of Mark IV Carbontes, you know, that piece that you constantly get from the Sith raid or the Rancor raid or from territory battles that you have thousands of in your inventory even though no one in the game uses them. He uses 2 of them, so you will be able to put some Mark IV Carbontes on him, and trust me, you're going to have those saved up. So for the most part, he can apply dots, that's great. There's no base potency on his own, so he has to rely on certain factions around him, which prevents him from being a plug-and-play character. Now, all of that can be countered by his Gear 12 Plus stuff, where he gets a lot of defense penetration, a lot of crit chance, still not a lot of potency, but in the long run, those Gear 12 Plus pieces really help boost his damage, which is the problem for us, because at 3 or 4 stars, we can't really use those because you have to have them at 7 stars to get to Gear 12 and to get those mods, or to get those gear pieces on him. So right now, not going to have those pieces, so he's still going to suffer from losing out on a lot of armor penetration, a lot of crit chance, a lot of damage. All that really sucks for him, and plus you have to have the Zeta on him for the crit damage up buff, which at the end of the day really sucks because that could have really helped boost his damage, but it's hard to say that it's worth investing on the Zeta for Canderous here because there are much more worthwhile Zetas in the game with other characters. So that's his kit. Let's go ahead and go into the battles, and you're gonna see does not work too well. Now, for the arena, I used him in a couple of various teams to fight your Traya and Revan teams, and really the only team I found to be even slightly reliable for him is unfortunately a Jedi Knight Revan team of all things. You do have other leads like Kira, Boba Fett, you do have some Scoundrel and Bounty Hunter leads that could have helped to apply to him, and of course you will need to run him with Old Republics or Scoundrels to really get that boost to his potency. So your options are severely limited here. Kira's definitely more of a defensive one or a raid PvE kind of lead. It's not really something you want to use for arena here. Boba Fett does have his uses. He gives crit chance and crit damage to allies, so that is nice to have. But really, Jedi Knight Revan's the only one that really gives a lot of boost to his viability. And that's because he gives bonus offense, speed, crit chance to your Old Republic and Jedi allies. And this is something Canderous benefits from. Same with Hot Topic Bastila, which is kind of ironic, but it is what it is. So with running them in arena, I found that fighting Traya teams was a very big struggle with Canderous Ordo in there. And fighting other Revan teams were even worse, bad enough that I don't really want to show you the footage because it's just painful to watch. Really, Ordo doesn't bring anything here. As long as Traya is up, you can't really get those dots to stick because she's constantly cleansing, so that's a problem. So his whole reliance on dots doesn't really happen here when fighting Traya. You could use a Vader lead, which we'll talk about that here in a few minutes, but really, versus the arena meta, versus your Traya, versus your Revans, Emperor Palpatine you could probably get some luck against, but versus Traya and Revan, definitely not going to be something you can use here. And this goes back to the fact that he is only 3 or 4 stars, and he's a physical damage based attacker. He doesn't have a lot of high boost to his stats. He's missing those vital Gear 12 pieces that give him a lot of damage. His 4 stars is really holding back his main stats, his agility, which translates to damage and crit chance. So he is missing a lot there with his stats, and that's going to be your problem with a lot of your attackers, is that when they're only 3 or 4 stars, you're not getting a lot of viability and usefulness out of them because they're such a low level compared to what you do have in the arena. So that is his main drawback here, and that's why he struggles so much against your arena meta. Now, against Palpatine, could find some usefulness. Against other weaker teams, he could have something there. You're not going to have him do that well against a Bastila lead and with the Jedi because all that boost to their tenacity is going to completely counter him. Not really going to find a lot of usefulness there. But really, he was made to kill tanks, but you don't have a lot of tank-heavy teams, and the only tank that you really see a lot of in here is General Kenobi and Darth Sion, and both those have ways to pretty much counter what you're going to fight here with Canderous. So really no place for him in the arena even to defeat those tanks that he's been so marketed as being towards. You know, there's a lot of talk about how he's here to kill tanks, defeat tanks, tear apart those tanks, and really make it hard for tanks to work in the arena. Not just really not seeing that with him at 3 or 4 stars. So that could totally change with him at a higher star count and better gear, but not really something you can apply to here. So not really that good in the arena. Not really a fit for any team that you're going to use in the arena. If you were working on something, you're trying to get through some tank heavy teams, maybe some timeout teams, he could probably find some usefulness there, but for the most part, not really something you want to consider gearing up for the arena. Now, for Territory Wars, there could be some usefulness here somewhere, but unfortunately the main drawback is, again, low star count. I do fight in a pretty competitive higher tier, so I do have strong competition there. I can't really find teams where I can get an accurate representation of him in Territory Wars. The best thing I could find was going to be a Kira-led team where you have Zalbar and L3 and several different characters who are constantly tanking that should ideally help drive up his damage, allow him to really start to cut through his tanks. Unfortunately, his low star count here was again a problem, so these are gear 12, 7-star tanks that he's fighting, just not able to cut the damage. I mean, you can see he's doing like 2,000-3,000 against these characters. That's nowhere near enough damage to really work. So there could be something here for him. Again, a B tier character here, not really something that you're going to see be in one of your main lineups. He could be useful if you're having like a Phoenix team. He could be useful against a Phoenix team, especially if Kanan and Chopper taunting. Could really help give him some buffs, help boost his damage. He could get some usefulness there, but maybe Ewoks as well. But who uses Ewoks on defense? Really, you want to find some weaker, lower level character that has a lot of tanks in it that you could use for Canderous here. Not many of those you're going to find on defense, but if you do find them and you do have a Canderous who's a moderate gear level and some moderate mods on him, you could find a use for him here. But for the most part, you're once again better off skipping over Canderous and going for much better characters out there. So one last thing I want to go over with him is that I mentioned earlier he's very limited in his leads, and the one thing that I found interesting that should be pointed out is that his synergies listed have him listed as best under a Vader lead, and that should be the first red flag for not being necessarily a good character. If you have to go outside of his faction to find a best synergistic lead for him, usually a flag that something's not quite right with that character. Now, I mean, the Vader lead does make sense for him because, you know, the Vader lead with the Zeta, the dots don't expire, they keep coming back. So there is that, but there's no bonuses to Canderous here beyond that leadership with the never expiring dots. So that could be a problem for him. Now, he could be useful in a Heroic AAT solo team with Vader, Wampa. You could throw in Canderous as well. Maybe some other characters like BB-8 and Hermit Yoda or something. Some kind of team that could do a lot of damage to the enemy, put out a lot of dots, really drive up that damage on Colleen Blade and the damage on Wampa. But that is the main trick. You have to find a raid team for him. And again, that falls out the purview of is he good at 3 or 4 stars. So there is that problem. Now, of course, one thing I should mention that you guys are probably screaming at me for is that he is a dark side KOTOR character. He is undoubtedly going to be used for whatever legendary or journey character we have down the road. Most likely going to be Malik or Revan. So you will have to gear him up eventually, and you know, people are saying, yeah, you've got to get him up to at least 5 stars for legendary, probably going to be a journey character for whoever. So he is going to be eventually need to go to 7 stars. So you are going to have to invest in him. However, we found in the journey characters, you really only need gear 7 or 8 at the minimum. 9 or 10 does perfectly fine in the journey events. So not a character you really have to go crazy on with gear. So a 7-star, gear 8, gear 9 Canderous Ordo, gonna be great for your journey teams. You don't really have to get him up to gear 11. I don't recommend getting up to gear 11. There's no use for him here. So that is my thoughts on Canderous Ordo. Not a top tier character by far. His kit's too restrictive. The Zeta really shouldn't be a Zeta, it should at least be an Omega. So there are some issues here. He doesn't have a lot of synergy outside of Scoundrels and KOTOR. He lacks quite a bit. And maybe down the road, we're going to get some Darkside KOTOR characters that are going to make him better. But for now, with him just being out and Hot Topic Bastila, I've got to say, there's really no use for Canderous Ordo in the game right now. So that's going to be it for this video, guys. I'd like to thank you guys for watching. A big thank you to all of my patrons. And if you guys have enjoyed this video, feel free to like, share, and subscribe. And I will talk to you guys later.